everyone, welcome back. So, the 2024 second round of the playoffs has continued, and Game 1 is actually starting today between one of the series, but we got Boston and Florida here. So, last night, the Bruins defeated the Maple Leafs in 7 games. Florida's been rested for a while, defeating the Lightning in 5 games, and these teams are facing off for the first time since last year. So, moving into the overall records in the regular season, the Panthers finished with the Atlantic Division winning record with a 52-24-6 for 110 points. They were 5th in the NHL, and as I mentioned earlier, they defeated Tampa in 5 games. So, again, I thought Florida, they had their points where they struggled a little bit in the regular season, but they looked overall really good during the regular season. And in the playoffs, they handled Tampa pretty easily. It really was not close. Tampa made it close in some of the games, like it was like 3-2, 2-1. There were a couple close games in there, but Florida kept control of that majoritively. And I think, honestly, if it weren't for Vasilevsky, I think that series would have ended in a sweep. It would have. And it would have been a commanding sweep, too. So, Florida's looking good. Boston, coming off of a 7-game series against the Maple Leafs, they finished the regular season with a 47-20-15 record for 109 points. They were 7th in the NHL this year. And as I mentioned, they beat Toronto in 7. So, at the end of the season, Boston actually had that first place spot in the Atlantic. They fell off at the end of the year, kind of lost a couple of games in a row, and they ended up playing Toronto. They beat them in 7 games. I'm not going to go too into that series because obviously I'm going to make a video on that. But the Bruins don't get a whole lot of rest between them because they literally play in less than 48 hours against Florida in Game 1, in Florida, in fact. So that's something that you got to keep in mind there, too. In terms of special teams, Florida has a 23.5 power play percentage, which is ranked 8th, and Boston has a 22.2, which is ranked 14th. So both teams have very good power plays, above average for sure. I think Florida has more offensive firepower when you're just looking at their overall on-paper roster. I think Boston has a team that on paper isn't great when you look at the overall roster, but they work well together. Like, I feel like on paper, you can make an argument that Toronto was better than Boston on paper, but I think that Boston just plays overall really good as a team. They're well coached by Montgomery, and that showed in this game against Toronto in 7. So it definitely shows that they have a really well-coached roster, even though the firepower isn't there. Their penalty kill percentage is 82.5 for Florida, which is ranked 6th, and Boston's actually tied with them with the same ranking. So they're both tied in that remark. So penalty killing could be very interesting here. I think that definitely Toronto got handled well by Boston on the power play. And Florida handled Tampa very well, too, on the power play. So it's 2 very well-contested penalty kills here coming up against each other in this second-round series. So in terms of individual scores, you have Sam Reinhart leading the way with the Florida Panthers with 57 goals, 37 assists for 94 points. He has 3 points in the playoffs, meaning 3 goals. So I thought Reinhart looked good in that first-round series, got goals when he needed to. Obviously, he was great in the regular season. I think he's definitely going to get paid. I say that in every single Panthers-related video. But I thought Reinhart had a really good playoffs, too. Matthew Tkachuk, 26 goals, 62 assists for 88 points. He had 9 points in the playoffs, 3 goals, 6 assists. So, Tkachuk, again, looking like the clutch player. Looking like a guy who can definitely score you the odd overtime goal, the odd clutch goal. It's not as lopsided as it was last year when he absolutely carried them to the Stanley Cup final. But Tkachuk's still in that spot where he is a very solid, well-rounded guy, and for sure will score some clutch goals in this playoff series. Alexander Barkov, 23 goals, 57 assists for 80 points. He has 5 points in the playoffs. So I thought Barkov, again, is a Selke nominee, has had great numbers in the regular season and the playoffs, was always that player who could score. Carter Verhaeghe, 4th in scoring, 34 goals, 38 assists, 72 points. He had 9 points in the playoffs. So I thought Verhaeghe, again, is that guy who can score in overtime, is that guy who can get the on and off clutch goal. He did score in overtime in game 2 against Tampa. So odds are there's a good chance that he will score an overtime goal in this playoff series. And he did last year, too, when they beat him in 7. And that's a lot of what's going to get referred back to here. With Verhaeghe, he was that insanely clutch guy last year against Boston. Could he be that player again? We shall obviously see. Fifth in scoring, Vladimir Tarasenko. He split his time with the Ottawa Senators and the Panthers. He has 23 goals, 32 assists for 55 points. He has 3 points in the playoffs so far. So Tarasenko, that deadline acquisition, has scored consistently for them in this playoff series. I definitely think that, though, against Boston, he's going to need to be relied on a little bit to score some of those secondary scoring and get some of that grit going on out there. So that's Florida's end. In terms of Boston scores, it's not as highly scored. You see Florida has 3 80-point scorers. Boston has 1. It's David Pastrnak. Pastrnak with 47 goals, 63 assists for 110 points. He has 5 points in the playoffs this year. So Montgomery comes out in Game 6 and says Pastrnak needs to step up, and look what he does. He scores the overtime winner in Game 7. You could have seen that from literally a mile away. Not surprised whatsoever. But above all, I do think that Pastrnak, if they're going to win this series, he needs to show up when it matters. I know we did against Toronto, but when you're looking at this coming series, you're playing a really highly touted offensive firepower team. You need to show up and start scoring more. That's what I need to see from Pastrnak. Brad Marchand, 29 goals, 38 assists for 67 points in the regular season. He had 8 points in the playoffs. So, again, Marchand, there's going to be that controversy. He's going to have a controversial call here and there where you're like, oh, man, he's soft. There was so many of that in the Leafs Bruins series. I will expect to see that again for sure. So, yeah, Marchand has looked like the solid captain we knew he was going to be. You got Charlie Coyle, 25 goals, 35 assists for 60 points. He had 2 assists in the playoffs. I think you're going to need some more secondary scoring. I know there's guys who can score on this team, but you just need more of it. You simply need more of it if you're going to be able to beat the Panthers. 100%. So Coyle, they're going to need some secondary goal scoring out of him. Pavel Zacha, 21 goals, 38 assists for 59 points in the regular season. He had 2 assists as well in the playoffs. So again, that same narrative. You see Florida, they have a lot of guys on this team who can score. Boston, not. They do, but not really. You're going to need more goals. 100%. Would also like to apologize for all these sudden pauses. It's May, and I have a cold, so that's not fun at all. But Charlie McAvoy, 5th in scoring with 12 goals, 35 assists for 47 points. I think McAvoy has looked good enough in this series. May need to see the on and off goal from him in this second round. Other guys that I thought were impressive, you got Hampus Lindholm. That's the second time I did that. I had another clip where I had to cut it out. But Hampus Lindholm for the defenseman, for the Boston Bruins, the defenseman, obviously had a good series, scored the Game 7 tying goal. I think you're going to need to see more of that out of him. Trent Frederic. Frederic had a very solid series as well, scored 3 goals. I thought that was pretty good from a guy like him, a nice secondary score. That's what you need. And then Jake DeBrusk. DeBrusk looks good in the playoffs too. I think he had 4 points. So definitely a guy you want to see more out of in this series against Florida. As for the Panthers guys, you got Gustav Forsling, has 4 assists. I thought he looked good as well. Forsling's always underrated as that guy who gets overlooked a little bit at times as a player who you think is, he's not bad, but he's just a forgotten defensive defenseman. But he's been really good. He has been. You got Anton Lundell. Lundell, a young rookie, was profiled as a bust, but I think still he's scored enough goals, scored secondary scoring to make this team go further and further in the playoffs. Then you got Brandon Montour. Montour, a good defenseman. Again, overlooked on that Florida defense, but has always been that solid guy. So I look at Montour. He's definitely going to need to be relied on this series. In terms of goaltending, that's the biggest thing you look at. It's a battle. You got Sergei Bobrovsky. Bobrovsky for the Panthers with a 36-17-4 record, a 2.37 and a .915. He was 4-1, a 2.78 and a .896 in the playoffs. So Bobrovsky's still looking like that goalie he looked like last year. I think that definitely if they want to win this series, they're going to have to shut down that Bruins offense. I honestly think they will, though. Bobrovsky alone can do that. He has been spectacular these last 2 seasons. And then you got Jeremy Swayman. Swayman has been a awesome goalie. He helped heavily in the Bruins beating the Leafs. If the Bruins are going to beat the Panthers, they need Swayman to show up. Swayman with a 25-10-8 record, a 2.53 and a .916. He went 4-2, a 1.49 and a .950 in the playoffs. Again, Swayman was a huge part in why they beat the Leafs in round 1. He's going to have to be a huge part if they beat the Panthers in round 2. That's the biggest thing that I need to see there from the Boston Bruins and Jeremy Swayman. But I think that in terms of overall predictions, I gotta go Panthers in 6. I think Florida has the overall better offensive power. They have a good defense. I think Boston does overall edge them out in that. I think that goaltending is going to be a battle. It could come down to who's the better goalie. This series could come down to that. This series could very well go 7 again. It could. These are two really solid teams. I know you look at Florida, they heavily handled Tampa. They took care of Tampa pretty easily. But, you look at Boston, too, you say, oh, they don't really have that good of an on-paper roster. They have a great roster when it comes to playing them. On paper, yes, Charlie Coyle and Pavel Zacha aren't great name players, but they have been effective. Trent Frederick, not really well known, has been effective in these playoffs. So I definitely think that this could be a really close series. That being said, I got Florida in 6. I think Florida, they're going to have more offensive power, and it's going to be too much for Boston to handle. And I think they're well-rested, too, which, again, you could argue well-rested. Well, that's the thing. If you're rested for a long time, you could be rusty. So there's a solid chance that come game 1 tomorrow, Florida loses. I honestly don't know what to expect, but I have Panthers in 6 as my overall prediction. Let me know yours in the comment section down below. Thank you all very much for watching. If you enjoyed, make sure to like and subscribe down below. I would greatly appreciate it, but regardless, I got more previews of these coming up. If you're interested in when I'm going to do the Bruins-Leafs series review, that'll probably be tomorrow, but obviously we shall see. But regardless, thank you all for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Adios.